The station was dying. High Warden Telvos could feel it in the way the lights flickered, in the distant groans of metal under stress, in the faces of his people as they moved through corridors that grew darker with each passing hour. 19 rotations. That was how long they had held the orbital defense station above Kaleth Prime. 19 rotations of constant bombardment, of sleepless nights, of watching their shields grow weaker while the enemy fleet grew stronger. Telvos stood at the command center's main viewport, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the stars were hidden behind a wall of Drath warships. He counted them again, though he already knew the number by heart. 47 vessels, arranged in a perfect blockade formation that left no gap, no weakness, no hope. The Valori were not a warrior species. They were scientists, explorers, builders of things that lasted. Their greatest achievement was not a weapon, but a device that could clear orbital debris, technology they had shared freely with younger species across the galaxy. They believed in cooperation, in the slow building of trust between worlds. The Drath believed in conquest. "High Warden," said Officer Kareth, approaching with a data tablet clutched in her trembling hands. "The shield generators on the eastern section have failed. We have perhaps 30 rotations before complete collapse." Telvos did not turn from the viewport. "And the hegemony fleet?" "Scattered across 3 systems. The Drath attacked multiple targets simultaneously. Our allies are fighting their own battles. No one can reach us in time." Below the station, visible through breaks in the cloud cover, lay Kaleth Prime itself. 2 million Valori lived on that world, most of them in the capital city of Vereth. They had built homes there, schools, libraries filled with knowledge gathered across centuries. Children played in parks, designed to mimic the forests of their ancestral homeworld. Now those children huddled in underground shelters, waiting to learn if they would live or die. Telvos finally turned to face his officer. Kareth was young, barely past her coming-of-age ceremony. She had joined the station's crew to study stellar phenomena, not to fight a war. None of them had expected to fight a war. "How many personnel remain?" he asked. 312, High Warden. 47 are wounded. Our medical supplies will last perhaps 10 more rotations. 300 souls against 47 warships. The mathematics were simple and cruel. Telvos walked to the communications console, where Officer Veneth sat monitoring frequencies that had gone silent days ago. The young male looked up with exhausted eyes. "Has there been any response to our distress calls?" Veneth shook his head. "Nothing, High Warden. The hegemony channels are full of combat chatter from other engagements. No one is coming." Telvos placed a hand on Veneth's shoulder. The gesture was meant to comfort, but he knew it offered little. What comfort could there be when death circled overhead, patient and inevitable? He thought of his bondmate, Solara, safe on a research vessel 3 systems away. He thought of their daughter, just beginning her studies at the Academy of Sciences. He would never see them again. He had accepted this truth somewhere around the 12th rotation, when the last supply ship had been destroyed, trying to break through the blockade. But acceptance did not mean surrender. "Open a new channel," Telvos said quietly. "Wide broadcast, maximum range." Veneth's fingers hesitated over the controls. "To whom, High Warden?" "The hegemony cannot." "Not the hegemony. Send it to the humans." The command center fell silent. Officers turned from their stations, confusion written on their faces. The humans were the newest members of the Galactic Compact, a young species that had achieved faster-than-light travel only 8 standard cycles ago. Their fleet was small, their territory distant, their military experience limited to minor skirmishes within their own system. "High Warden," Kareth said carefully, "the humans are 18 light-years away. Even if they wished to help, they could not arrive in time. And their fleet, forgive me, but 4 ships cannot stand against the Drath Armada. I know, Telvos replied. But I remember something. When the humans first made contact with the Compact, their planet was in crisis. A cascade of debris in their orbit threatened to trap them on their world forever. They had no solution, no hope of reaching the stars. He paused, remembering the reports he had read, the images he had seen of the desperate young species looking upward at a sky that had become a prison. We helped them, he continued. The Valori shared our debris-clearing technology freely, asking nothing in return. Some members of the Compact criticized us for it. They said the humans were too primitive, too violent, too unpredictable. They said we were wasting resources on a species that would never amount to anything. Telvos looked at the viewport again, at the Drath ships that blocked out the stars. I do not know if the humans remember our gift. I do not know if they care. But I know that when we had the power to help someone in need, we did so without hesitation. And now, when we are the ones in need, I choose to believe that such kindness is not forgotten. Perhaps I am foolish. Perhaps this message will vanish into the void and mean nothing. But I would rather die having asked for help than die having given up on the possibility of compassion. He nodded to Venice. Open the channel. The young officer's fingers moved across the controls. A soft tone indicated the broadcast was live. Telvos spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. He knew that human translation systems were imperfect, that nuances might be lost across the gulf of language and culture. He needed to be clear. He needed to be understood. To any who hear this message, this is High Warden Telvos of the Valori Defense Station Calith 7. Our world is under siege. The Drath Collective has blockaded our planet with a fleet we cannot defeat. Our shields are failing. Our supplies are low. We have 300 personnel on this station and 2 million civilians on the surface below. He paused, steadying his voice. We have sent calls for aid to our allies, but they are engaged in battles of their own. No help is coming from the hegemony. So I send this message into the void, to whoever might hear it, to whoever might care. Another pause. The weight of what he was about to say pressed down on him like gravity itself. We have children here, families, people who have never harmed anyone, who want only to live in peace. If there is mercy in this galaxy, if compassion exists beyond the borders of species and territory, let it find us now. We do not ask for miracles. We only ask that someone, somewhere, hears this message and chooses to answer. He closed his eyes. Calith Prime falls within 30 rotations. If you can help us, please. We are running out of time. The transmission ended. The command center remained silent. Officers returned to their stations, their movements slow and heavy with the burden of fading hope. Telvos stood alone at the viewport, watching the enemy fleet, and waited for an answer he did not expect to receive. Captain Laura Mitchell was drinking her morning coffee when the message arrived. She sat in her quarters aboard the USS Defiance, reviewing maintenance reports and trying to ignore the headache that had been building since yesterday. Command meetings always gave her headaches. The ship's communication officer interrupted with a priority alert. Laura set down her coffee and listened as the translation software converted the alien transmission into English. The voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable weight of despair. When it finished, she sat very still for a long moment. Then she called a meeting. The war room of the Defiance was a circular chamber, filled with holographic displays and tactical screens. Laura's senior officers gathered around the central table, their faces showing various degrees of confusion and concern. They had all heard the message by now. Commander Danny Ortega stood at Laura's right hand, as he had for the past 6 years. He was 45, broad-shouldered, with gray beginning to show at his temples. He had served with Laura since their days on the old patrol cruisers, back when humanity's space navy consisted of 3 ships and a lot of hope. "Play it again," Laura said. The message filled the room once more. High Warden Telvos's voice, translated into flat English that could not capture the emotion underneath, described the situation at Calith Prime. When it ended, silence hung in the air like smoke. 18 light-years, said Lieutenant Commander Megan Cho, the tactical officer. She was young for her rank, barely 30, but she had earned her position through skill and determination. She pulled up a star map on the central display. "That's 3 weeks at maximum burn, maybe less if we push the engines past safety limits." "And the enemy force?" Laura asked. 47 draft vessels, according to the transmission. "We have 1 carrier, 2 destroyers, and a frigate." Megan's voice was steady, professional. "Captain, I need to say this clearly. If we go, we are going to lose ships, probably all of them." Chief Engineer Carlos Reyes spoke up from his seat near the wall. He was a quiet man who preferred machines to people, but his voice carried weight when he chose to use it. "The engines can handle the extended burn, but there will be damage. We would need significant repairs afterward, assuming there is an afterward." Laura looked around the table at her officers. She saw fear in some faces, doubt in others. But she also saw something else, something that burned beneath the surface. These were people who had joined the fleet because they believed in something larger than themselves. "The Valori helped us," Danny said into the silence. "When the Kessler Cascade nearly ended our space program, they shared technology that saved us. They asked for nothing in return. If they hadn't helped, we would still be trapped on Earth, looking up at a sky full of debris, dreaming of stars we could never reach." Political liaison Howard Grant cleared his throat. He was a civilian attached to the ship by Earth's Central Command, responsible for ensuring diplomatic relations with alien species. He was also responsible for telling Laura all the reasons she should not do things. "The Galactic Compact Council will not authorize intervention," Howard said carefully. "The Drath have not attacked human interests. If we involve ourselves in this conflict, we will be acting without official support. If we fail, humanity loses its only carrier battle group, and any political standing we've built in the Compact." "And if we succeed?" Laura asked. Howard hesitated. "Then we make powerful enemies. The Drath Collective will not forget. We would be painting a target on Earth itself." Laura stood and walked to the viewport. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant against the black of space. Somewhere out there, 2 million people were waiting to die, hoping against hope that someone would care enough to save them. She thought about her own life, the choices that had brought her here. She had grown up in Arizona, in a small town where the sky stretched forever and the stars seemed close enough to touch. Her grandmother had told her stories about the early days of the space program, about brave men and women who had risked everything to reach beyond Earth. "My grandmother used to say something," Laura said, not turning from the viewport. "She said that the measure of a person isn't what they do when things are easy, it's what they do when things are hard. When doing the right thing might cost them everything." She turned to face her officers. "The Valori helped us when we were nobody, when we had nothing to offer, when helping us was probably considered a waste of time by half the species in the galaxy. They didn't ask what they would get in return. They just saw people in trouble and decided to help." She walked back to the table and placed her hands flat on its surface. "I didn't join this fleet to watch people die while I calculated the politics. I didn't spend 20 years of my life learning to command a ship so I could sit safely in port while children huddle in shelters, waiting for an enemy that wants to destroy them." Her eyes moved from face to face, meeting each gaze directly. "I'm going to Calith Prime. I'm taking the Defiance, and anyone who wants to come with me. If Command wants to court-martial me afterward, they're welcome to try. But I won't be able to live with myself if I do nothing." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Danny Ortega straightened in his seat. I've served with you for 6 years, Captain. If you're going, I'm going. Megan Cho nodded slowly. Someone needs to figure out how to beat 47 ships with 4. Might as well be me. One by one, the other officers voiced their agreement. Even Howard Grant, though his face was pale, did not object. Laura felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she was holding. Then let's get to work. Signal the rest of the battle group. We leave in 6 hours. She paused at the door, looking back at her people. And someone send a message to Caleth Prime. Tell them help is coming. In the communications center, a young ensign named Marcus Webb typed out the response. He was 22, from Austin, Texas, and he had joined the fleet because he wanted to see the stars. He had never expected to fly into a battle that could kill him. But as he typed the words, "Hold on, we are coming," he felt something stir in his heart. Pride, maybe, or simply the knowledge that he was part of something that mattered. The message shot into space at the speed of light, racing toward a distant world where 300 souls waited in the darkness. Help was coming. The journey to Caleth Prime was the longest 3 weeks of Laura Mitchell's life. The engines screamed. That was the only word for it. Carlos Reyes had pushed them past every safety limit in the book, and the fusion drives responded with sounds that no engineer wanted to hear. Metal groaned. Warning lights blinked constantly. The entire ship vibrated with a low hum that never stopped, even when the crew tried to sleep. Carlos lived in the engine room during those weeks. He slept on a cot next to the main reactor, waking every few hours to check readings and make adjustments. His team worked in shifts, replacing components that burned out, patching systems that failed, doing everything possible to keep the ship moving. "She's holding together," Carlos reported during one of Laura's visits to engineering. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, his uniform stained with grease. "I've never asked this much from her before." "Can she make it?" Carlos looked at the engine readouts, numbers flickering across the screens. "She'll make it. I promised her a full overhaul when this is done. New manifolds, new coolant systems, the works. She's a good ship, Captain. She won't let us down." Laura nodded and squeezed his shoulder. "Neither will you." While Carlos fought to keep them moving, Megan Cho fought a different battle in the tactical center. Every day, she and her team gathered around holographic displays, studying everything they knew about Drath technology, Drath tactics, Drath weaknesses. "The Drath rely on formation warfare," Megan explained during one briefing. The display showed the enemy fleet arrangement, 47 ships in a perfect geometric pattern. They fight as a single unit, coordinated through a central command vessel. Every ship knows its role, its position, its targets. It's elegant, really, like watching a machine operate. "And machines have weaknesses," Danny Ortega said. "Exactly." Megan highlighted the command ship at the center of the formation. Take out the brain, and the body struggles to function. But getting to the command ship is almost impossible. It's protected by layers of other vessels, all covering each other. "Almost impossible isn't impossible," Laura said. Megan smiled grimly. "No, it isn't. The Drath have never fought humans before. They don't know how we think. They don't know what we're willing to do." Over the following days, a plan took shape. It was risky. Some would have called it insane. It relied on speed, misdirection, and a willingness to accept losses that would make most commanders hesitate. But Laura did not hesitate. She studied the plan, asked questions, suggested modifications. The crew began preparing. During the journey, Laura made a point of walking the ship's corridors every day. She visited every section, spoke with every crew member she encountered, learned their names and their stories. In the medical bay, she met Petty Officer Nina Vance, a medic from Detroit. Nina was 30 years old, with steady hands and calm eyes that had seen difficult things. "Why did you join the fleet?" Laura asked her. Nina considered the question. "My grandmother was alive during the Kessler Cascade. She told me about the day the Valori ships arrived, how everyone had given up hope, how people thought we would be trapped on Earth forever. Then these alien vessels appeared and started clearing the debris, asking nothing in return." She paused, checking supplies on a nearby shelf. "My grandmother cried that day. She said it was the first time she truly believed we weren't alone in the universe. That there was good out there, beyond our world. I joined the fleet because I wanted to be part of that good." In the fighter bay, Laura found Lieutenant Pete Harrison running simulations with his pilots. He was young, 28, with the confidence that came from knowing he was the best pilot in the fleet. "Captain," he said, saluting, "my people are ready. Whatever you need us to do, we'll do it. Even if it might kill you?" Pete's smile faded slightly, but his eyes remained steady. "We all knew the risks when we signed up. Dying doesn't scare me. Dying for nothing, that scares me. But this isn't nothing. This matters." On the final night before arrival, Laura addressed the entire crew. They gathered in the main hangar bay, nearly 800 people standing in rows beneath the fighters and shuttles. Some faces were young, barely out of training. Others showed the lines of experience and service. Laura stood on a raised platform, looking out at the people who had trusted her enough to follow her into a battle they might not survive. "Tomorrow," she began, "we arrive at Caleth Prime. You all know what we're facing. 47 enemy ships against our 4. A species that has been waging war for centuries against a species that's been flying between stars for less than a decade. By every measure, this is a fight we cannot win." She let those words hang in the air. "But here's what I know about humans. We've never been good at doing what we're supposed to do. When the odds are against us, when everyone says it's impossible, when the smart thing is to give up and go home, we don't. We dig in, we fight harder, we find a way." She thought of her grandmother, of stories told under Arizona stars. 8 years ago, we were trapped on a single planet, watching our dreams die in a cloud of debris. The Valori saved us. They gave us the stars. Now they're the ones who need help, and there's no one else coming. Just us. 4 ships and 800 stubborn, crazy humans who refuse to let good people die alone. She looked at the faces before her, seeing fear and determination mixed together. "I won't lie to you. Some of us won't make it home. I wish I could promise otherwise, but I respect you too much to give you false hope. What I can promise is this: whatever happens tomorrow, we will face it together. We will fight with everything we have. And when the history books are written, they will say that when the Valori called for help, humanity answered." She straightened, her voice rising. "That's who we are. That's what we do. And tomorrow we're going to show the galaxy what happens when you mess with people under our protection." The hangar erupted in cheers, voices bouncing off metal walls and high ceilings. Laura watched her crew, her people, and felt a fierce pride burn in her chest. Tomorrow would be the hardest day of their lives, but they would face it together. High Warden Telvos had stopped hoping 3 rotations ago. The shields were failing across the entire station now. Power flickered constantly. The medical bay was full of wounded, and the supplies had run out yesterday. On the surface below, the colony had gone silent, not because they were dead, but because there was nothing left to say. The Drath commander had begun broadcasting surrender demands every few hours. His voice was cold and mechanical, promising mercy that everyone knew was a lie. The Drath did not show mercy. They conquered, they absorbed, they erased. Species that fell under their control lost everything: their culture, their history, their identity. Telvos stood at the viewport of the command center, watching the enemy fleet circle like predators waiting for wounded prey to die. His officers worked quietly at their stations, going through motions that no longer mattered. They were simply waiting now. He thought of the message he had sent to the humans 3 weeks ago, a desperate cry into the void. He had known even then that it was hopeless. The humans were too far away, too few, too inexperienced. They owed the Valori nothing except old gratitude, and gratitude rarely survived the mathematics of war. "High Warden," said Officer Kareth, her voice hollow. "The Drath are charging weapons again. Another bombardment incoming." Telvos did not respond. What was there to say? The station shuddered as enemy fire struck the weakening shields. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion echoed through the corridors. Another system failing. Another piece of their defense crumbling. Then Officer Venith made a sound that Telvos had never heard from a Valori. A gasp of pure, disbelieving shock. "High Warden, contact emerging from fault space." Telvos turned slowly, expecting nothing. Perhaps a Drath reinforcement ship. Perhaps a hegemony vessel arriving too late, forced to witness their destruction from a safe distance. Single vessel? No. 4 vessels. Venith's fingers flew across his console, his voice rising. Configuration unknown. They're not Drath. They're not hegemony. They're... The holographic display flickered, and Telvos saw them. 4 ships had appeared in the void behind the Drath blockade. They had emerged from a trajectory that cut through the Keleth radiation belt, a region of space the Drath had assumed was impassable. Any normal ship would have been torn apart by the radiation. But these ships were not normal. The largest vessel was already broadcasting on all frequencies. A human female's voice filled the command center, speaking in accented but clear galactic common. "Drath Collective Forces, this is Captain Laura Mitchell of the USS Defiance. You are engaged in hostile action against a member species of the Galactic Compact. You will withdraw immediately, or we will remove you." Telvos gripped the edge of a console to steady himself. His hearts were pounding in a rhythm they had forgotten. They came. The humans actually came. The Drath commander's response came moments later, his voice dripping with contempt. "Human vessel, you are outnumbered and outgunned. You have no authority here. Withdraw immediately, or be destroyed." Captain Mitchell's reply was calm. "I gave you a chance. Remember that." What happened next would change the galaxy forever. The smallest human ship, a frigate designated USS Valor, suddenly accelerated. It shot toward the Drath command ship at speeds that should have torn the vessel apart. The acceleration was impossible, insane, suicidal. Every Drath weapon in the fleet turned to track it. The air filled with weapons fire, beams of energy and missiles converging on the tiny ship. "What are they doing?" Karath whispered. "They killing themselves." But Telvos was watching the other human ships. The 2 destroyers had split apart and were racing toward the flanks of the Drath formation. They weren't attacking. They were positioning. The Valor's shields failed. Its hull began to buckle under the bombardment. The ship was dying. And then, at the last possible moment, it released its payload. Not weapons. Escape pods. Hundreds of them, launched directly at the Drath command ship. The pods struck the flagship's sensor arrays like a swarm of insects. They were too small to cause significant damage, but they were perfect for one thing: blinding the enemy. The Drath command ship's sensors went dark. For exactly 47 seconds, the center of the Drath fleet could not see. In those 47 seconds, the USS Defiance opened its hangar bays. Human fighters poured into space like angry wasps. They flew in formations that no other species could match, pulling maneuvers that would crush most pilots under the force of acceleration. Human bodies, evolved on a high-gravity world, could withstand pressures that would kill Drath or Valori. Lieutenant Pete Harrison led the attack. His voice crackled over the communication channels, calling targets, directing fire, weaving between enemy ships with impossible precision. The Drath formation began to break. Their coordinated defense depended on their command ship, and their command ship was blind. The two human destroyers struck from the flanks. The USS Steadfast targeted engine systems, crippling ships and leaving them drifting. The USS Horizon went for weapons, disabling the biggest threats before they could bring their guns to bear. When the Drath command ship's sensors came back online, the battle had already changed. Their fighter screen was in chaos, human pilots dancing between them like ghosts, and the Defiance itself had moved into position directly above the command ship, its main batteries charged and ready to fire. Captain Mitchell's voice came over all channels again. "Your flagship is in my sights. Your formation is broken. Your reinforcements are too far away to help. You can keep fighting and lose more ships, or you can withdraw. Your choice." The Drath commander was silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time in recorded history, a Drath fleet retreated from a battle it had been winning. It took 4 hours for the enemy to withdraw completely. They left behind 11 destroyed or crippled vessels, more than the Drath had lost in any single engagement in decades. The humans lost the valor. The brave little ship had been reduced to floating wreckage, though her crew had been recovered by shuttles from the Defiance. Both destroyers were badly damaged, trailing smoke and debris. But they had won. In the command center of the orbital station, High Warden Telvos watched the last Drath ship vanish into fold space. His officers were cheering, crying, embracing each other with emotions they had forgotten they could feel. He opened a channel to the human carrier. "USS Defiance," he said, his voice unsteady. "This is High Warden Telvos. I do not have words sufficient to express. We thought no one was." Captain Mitchell's response was warm and tired. "We got your message, High Warden. Sorry it took us so long to get here." Telvos felt moisture gathering at the corners of his eyes, a physical response he had not experienced since childhood. "You came," he whispered. "You actually came." "That's what we do," Mitchell replied simply. The medical bay of the orbital station was crowded with wounded when Captain Laura Mitchell came aboard. Valori lay on beds and stretchers, their pale blue skin marked with burns and injuries from weeks of bombardment. Human medics moved among them, working alongside Valori doctors to treat wounds and save lives. The two species had different biology, different medicine, different everything, but they found ways to help each other. High Warden Telvos met Laura at the entrance. He was smaller than she had expected, reaching only to her shoulder, with large dark eyes that held depths of emotion she could not fully read. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that needed no translation. "Captain Mitchell, I do not know how to thank you. Words feel insufficient." Laura looked around the medical bay, at the wounded being tended, at the faces showing relief instead of despair. "You don't have to thank me. You would have done the same for us." "We did," Telvos said quietly, "years ago, when your world was in crisis. But we never expected the debt to be repaid. We gave freely, without expectation. That's exactly why we came." Laura met his eyes. "Where I come from, we have a saying. No one gets left behind. When someone needs help, you help them. You don't ask what you'll get in return. You just do it because it's right." Telvos was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Captain, I must confess something. When I sent that message into the void, I did not truly believe anyone would answer. I did it because I could not accept despair without at least trying. I thought I was sending words into emptiness." He paused, gathering himself. "But you heard, and you came. Across 18 light-years of space, through dangers that should have stopped you, against odds that should have crushed you. You came." Laura thought of her crew, of the Valor's sacrifice, of Carlos keeping the engines alive through sheer willpower. of Pete Harrison and his pilots dancing between enemy ships. She thought of Nina Vance in the medical bay, of Marcus Webb typing out that first response message, of every person who had chosen to risk their lives for strangers they had never met. "We're new to this galaxy," she said softly. "We don't have ancient wisdom or vast fleets or great wealth. We're still figuring out our place among the stars. But we know who we want to be. We know what kind of species we want to become." She looked out the viewport at the Defiance, floating in orbit alongside the battered station. The ship showed scars from the battle, hull plating scorched and damaged. It would need months of repairs. But it had survived. They all had. "We want to be the kind of people who answer when someone calls for help. That's what we bring to this compact. Not technology. Just the promise that we will always try to do the right thing." The news of Calith Prime spread across the galaxy within days. The Drath Collective filed formal protests with the Compact Council, demanding sanctions against humanity for unprovoked aggression. They called the humans dangerous, reckless, a threat to galactic stability. The Council's response, drafted primarily by Valori representatives, was simple and direct. The humans had acted in accordance with the highest principles of the Compact. Their actions were not only justified, but commended. Other species began to take notice. The Karathi, a warrior culture that had dismissed humans as soft and weak, sent a formal message of respect. The Seleneth, masters of interstellar trade, offered favorable agreements to human merchants. Even the reclusive Hithani, who rarely involved themselves in galactic affairs, acknowledged that the humans had demonstrated admirable qualities. 6 months later, Ambassador Patricia Delgado addressed the full Galactic Assembly for the first time. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, wearing a simple blue suit that contrasted with the elaborate robes and ceremonial dress of other representatives. She stood at the central podium, looking out at the assembled delegates of 100 worlds. "We are young," she began, her voice clear and steady. "We are small. We have made terrible mistakes in our own history, and we will probably make more. We do not claim to be perfect, or wise, or powerful." She paused, letting her words settle. "But we have learned one truth that we carry with us into the stars. The measure of a civilization is not its power, but its compassion. Not what it takes, but what it gives. Not how it conquers, but how it protects." Her eyes moved across the chamber, meeting the gazes of beings from worlds she had never seen. When the Valori called for help, there was never a question of whether we would answer. There was only the question of how fast we could get there. We did not calculate the politics. We did not weigh the risks against the rewards. We simply heard that people were in danger, and we went. She straightened, her voice rising with conviction. "That is humanity's promise to this galaxy. We may not always win. We may not always be right. We may not have the biggest ships or the strongest weapons. But we will always come when you call. We will always try to help. And we will never leave anyone behind." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the Valori representative rose to his feet and began to applaud. The Karathi joined him. The Seleneth, the Hethani. One by one, species that had questioned humanity's place in the Compact rose to acknowledge the promise that had been made. In the observation gallery above the chamber, Captain Laura Mitchell watched the scene unfold. Danny Ortega stood beside her, his arms still in a healing cast from injuries sustained during the battle. Megan Cho was there, and Carlos Reyes, and dozens of others who had survived Calith Prime. "Think they believe us?" Danny asked quietly. Laura watched the delegates below, representatives of civilizations that had been exploring space for thousands of years before humans had learned to make fire. They had seen species rise and fall, empires build and crumble, promises made and broken countless times. "It doesn't matter if they believe us," she said finally. "What matters is that we meant it. What matters is that when the time came, we did the right thing." She thought of High Warden Telvos, of the children in shelters on Calith Prime, of all the people who had been given another chance at life, because a handful of humans had refused to accept that some things were impossible. "That's who we are," she said. "That's who we're going to keep being. And eventually, the galaxy will learn to count on it." Below them, the assembly rose in something that, across 100 different species, looked remarkably like hope. The humans had arrived among the stars, and they had arrived exactly as they meant to continue.